guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you 5 different ways to paint white whiskers using watercolor paints. Let's get started. Number 1, negative painting. The first method I'm going to show you is considered the purest way to paint white in watercolor. It's called negative painting. When you use this method, you are simply painting around the object. This technique requires a steady hand and lots of control. To paint around the slender and delicate white whiskers of this cat, I first lightly sketch them on the paper. This gives me something to follow with the movement of my brush. I then mix up a generous amount of paint for the background. I'm using a very dark color, a combination of Payne's Gray and Sepia. And using a small brush, this is a silver black velvet size 4 round brush, I first paint along the top side of one whisker, then the underside of the one above it, and then quickly fill in the space in between. You need to work quickly using this method so that no hard lines form along your whiskers, because this would make them look cartoony and outlined. If you accidentally cover up one of the whiskers, just rinse your brush all the way clean, remove any excess water, and lift the wet paint back out of the whisker you covered up. You can also use this lifting technique to reveal smaller, more softly diffused whiskers against the background. Now, this method is not my favorite because it can be so tricky. But if you're confident with a brush, it can produce some of the cleanest and purest looking whiskers. Number 2, opaque white watercolor paint. The next method I'm going to show you is probably my favorite way of painting whiskers and also one of the easiest methods. For this tiger study, I used a white watercolor by Dr. P.H. Martins called Bleed Proof White. It comes in a small bottle and is actually intended to be used as a pure white over the top of your watercolor painting, so it's not meant for mixing with other colors. To paint this tiger, I did all of the base layers first, still adding tons of fur texture around the mouth, but not worrying about whiskers at all. I then used a tiny detail brush, this one is the Lebenson Itty Bitty Orange Synthetic Brush, to paint on the white whiskers. When you're using this method, try to plan ahead for the motion of your brush. Visualize the start and end point, and complete the whisker all in one long swooping line. Try to feather your brush up and away at the end of each mark so that the whiskers look tiny and delicate at the very ends. If you don't have bleed-proof white, white gouache or white acrylic paint also work really well for this method. Number 3, white charcoal pencil. To do the whiskers on this dog, I used a white charcoal pencil. This is just an inexpensive pencil by General. If you use this method for whiskers, just make sure your pencil is nice and sharp. For this one, I approached the painting the same way as the tiger. I sketched it on first, then painted it in layers. I finished all of the details with plenty of fur texture, still leaving highlights on the nose and eye, and preserving some of the white of the paper on the muzzle by allowing the bristles of my brush to miss some areas. Even if you intend to use a method where you paint on the whiskers last, you'll still be much happier with the result if you can accomplish most of the details using your watercolor paint, so that those final touches with white at the end are minimal. Once the paint was completely dry, I went in with my charcoal pencil and added the whiskers. The pencil worked well for this particular subject because the white hairs on this retriever dog were particularly fine, short, bristly, and tiny. I could be confident using a pencil that I wouldn't accidentally make any whiskers too large or bold, and even if you do make a mistake, you can easily and gently remove the white charcoal using a kneaded eraser. Method number 4, masking fluid. For the whiskers on this white and gray cat, I used liquid latex, which is also known as masking fluid or liquid frisket, to protect the white of the paper. I used a fine line resist pen, which is great because it is self-cleaning and it can produce a very tiny line for those delicate cat whiskers. If you're more of a purist about watercolor and don't want to use opaque paint or any mixed medium on your painting, this method is one of the preferred methods used by watercolor artists to protect small white details in a painting. One big advantage to using masking fluid is that you can paint freely and loosely in broad washes over the top so that you can achieve more uniform background colors surrounding those whiskers, as opposed to when I was painting around the whiskers and the background values looked a little bit uneven. 3 important tips when using masking fluid. Number 1, always make sure your masking fluid is completely dry before beginning your painting. Number 2, never use a heat tool to speed up drying or you will permanently bond the masking fluid to the watercolor paper. And number 3, make sure your painting is dry before removing the masking fluid. Once you've removed the masking fluid, you can see the white paper has been perfectly preserved, but the edges are quite hard and stark. You might need to touch up the edges to help the white areas feel more blended and connected to the rest of the painting. Number 5, white gel pens. For my last whisker demonstration of a red panda, I used my Buxton white gel pens. Whenever you are using an opaque medium to add details, I sketched on the red panda, then painted in layers using some negative painting techniques to preserve the white of the paper and some of the areas of the fur. Once I completed all the base washes of color and shadow, I went in with my gel pen to paint on the whiskers. Be careful not to press too hard when applying your markings, as this can sometimes prevent the ink from flowing, especially if you're using a cold pressed or somewhat textured paper. Try to complete each whisker in one long line. And as a quick disclaimer, gel pens are generally not light fast, so this method of adding white to your watercolor painting might be best reserved for studies or painting journals rather than artwork you intend to frame and display. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here. All 5 of these whisker studies are available in real time through my online school. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check out all the tutorials that are currently available. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.